Welcome to the Fiscal Physical Podcast. Join us each week as we sit down with the founder of Alchemy Wealth Management and author of Your Fiscal Physical, Ryan Nelson. Tune in to gain valuable insights and practical tips as we simplify complex financial concepts into digestible lessons. From budgeting to retirement planning, this podcast is your go-to resource for mastering financial literacy.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Fiscal Physical Podcast. I am Aaron. I'm the host of this podcast, and appreciate everyone joining in to go on this financial journey with myself and the founder of Alchemy Wealth Management, Ryan Nelson. How are you today, Mr. Nelson?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Yeah, I could not be better. I feel like I just, my son's been sleeping at home. I got a 3-month-old at home, so I'm sure he'll change that this week. But I feel like, I just had my annual meeting with Alchemy Wealth Management, and it seems like, I am completely broke. So no, but overall, man, things are going great, and I'm excited to share some more financial knowledge with the listeners and really break down this week's topic.
Yeah, I'm excited. Let's do it.
Awesome, cool. So last week we spoke about what mutual funds were,
Correct.
And this week we are going to dive into ETFs, not to be confused with NFTs, which are totally different, and you shouldn't invest in those. Well, maybe you should, not my call. But what is an ETF, Ryan? How can you break that down for us?
Yeah, so ETF, it stands for Exchange Traded Fund. So it is a fund again. So like you said last week, we touched on mutual funds. There's certainly some differences. So these exchange traded funds, or ETFs, so these, I think the first ETF started in the early 90s. I think 1993 is from the data I saw. But really, they didn't start gaining popularity until like the housing crash, that 2007, 2008 time period. And they've really just been gaining popularity pretty exponentially ever since. Mm-hmm. I'll kind of hit some of these kind of highlights again of them, and then I'll explain a little bit about like how they work behind the scenes.
Okay. Awesome.
So they are generally going to be passively managed. There are some exceptions to that rule, but in general, when you're talking about ETFs, you're typically talking about a passively managed investment. The average expense ratio or cost to own to own an exchange traded fund is typically about 0.16%. So 0.16%. So let's talk a little bit about how these things work. So these are not, we talked last week about mutual funds and how they were pooled funds, right? These inherently are not pooled in the same way. So these are a fund. So it is a collection of underlying securities. So when you buy an ETF, an exchange traded fund, you are buying you're buying a bunch of stocks and bonds, depending on what ETF you buy, but you're buying a bunch of underlying securities still. So you are buying a collection of investments, but they're not pooled with any other investor. So if I go buy, like the most common ETF out there is the S&P 500 ETF. And
what does it stand for?
S&P 500.
What's S&P actually mean?
Standard and Poor.
I just learned that the other day, and I was super excited about
nice.
it. Yeah, so I was like,
cool.
I'll throw that around all the time, but I never knew that standards and poor. Standards and poor.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
And so it's basically the S&P 500. This isn't exactly how it works, but a decent way of thinking about it is it's kind of like the biggest 500 companies in the country. It's not perfectly true. It's not always the biggest 500, but it's 500 big companies in the country, in the U.S. And so there are ETFs out there that are S&P 500 ETFs. And effectively what it does is it owns essentially those 500 companies, right? And the S&P 500 can be a little bit more, a little bit less than 500 companies at any one time, but it would hold the companies in the S&P 500. And so you buy now one fund, and you can get access to these 500 companies, right? Which is pretty awesome. So you could put $100 into an S&P 500 ETF, get exposure to all 500 companies, super easy, right? Whereas if you were to go out and buy all those 500 different companies, you couldn't really do that with $100, right? And so it's a way to get a diversified portfolio, like super easily. And so one of the nice things about an ETF is when you go out and you buy, say, that S&P 500, it's kind of like it's building this little portfolio specifically for you. So when you go buy this S&P 500 ETF, you're buying like this, if you put $100 into it, right? You buy this like kind of this micro percentage of Amazon and of Google and of Facebook and of Chevron and of all these different companies. But it's specific to you. So nobody else's actions that own that same ETF are going to impact you in any way. So if you own this S&P 500 fund and I'm buying and selling it over here, it's not affecting you, which is nice. So it's this individualized sort of transaction. But that's high level what an exchange traded fund is.
Okay, cool. That as with a lot of things, I feel like it opens up a lot of questions that I have here. First one, I'm just thinking about, is there a reason why it's really exploded in the last, 20 years, if you were 15 years? Like, is there a reason behind that?
So let's address some of the pros.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Of ETFs right now, and that will, really, that's effectively why it's exploding, is people think there's a lot of pros, right? So it's just popularity. But so some of the pros are they're relatively low cost. So 0.16% is the average. Again, if you go buy an S&P 500 fund, we've been using a fund here at Alchemy that's charging 0.03%. So 0.03%. That's 3% of 1% is your total cost. So it's very, very cost efficient. So that may be one pro that people have gravitated towards. There is a lot of tax control. So now if you buy an ETF, and we're making strategic financial decisions long term, it's nice to have control over your tax situation. So if sometimes we want to recognize more taxes in this year, which would be tax gains harvesting. Sometimes we want to recognize less taxes in this year. That would be tax loss harvesting. We have control over that, right? And so you have a lot more tax control in an ETF, which is nice from a strategic standpoint. It does allow intraday trading. So when you buy an ETF, you know exactly the price. When you push buy, you know exactly the price you're getting. When you push sell, you know exactly the sell price you're getting. If at noon you hit sell, that transaction is going through at noon. So it's going through basically immediately, as long as the market is open at that time you want to do it, right? So that intraday trading is nice. And then again, you get that same, you get diversification, right? So this one fund can get you diversification, and you could go find a different fund that checks a lot of these different boxes. So again, if you wanted an ETF that represents US stocks, or if you wanted an ETF that represents small cap US stocks, or if you want an ETF that maybe just tracks gold, you could go buy a gold ETF. Or if you want one that tracks foreign bonds, you could find a bond ETF, right? So it gives you this tool where you can get as diversified as you want, or as specific as you want. So those are a lot of the pros, and that's why we've seen a lot of this growth, is people just think there's a lot of value there. And so people have been transitioning more and more money into these exchange traded funds.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, because all the pros that you just said there sound amazing on paper. Mm-hmm. What are the cons? Like, what are some of the cons of it? Why would somebody just be like, why wouldn't somebody want to have an ETF, I suppose? Like, what would be some of the drawbacks for them?
Yeah. So I told you the cost was maybe on average somewhere in the neighborhood of 0.16%. Mm-hmm. One person might perceive that as a super low cost and say, that's a pro, I want that.
Right.
Another person might look at that and say, gosh, I'm going to pay somebody 0.16%? No, I'll just go buy my own stocks and I'll buy my own bonds. So that could be a negative. And you could say, why would I pay any added cost, right? So certainly there's that cost consideration. So again, a consideration you need to have, make sure you're getting enough value out of the fund that it compensates for that cost you're paying. Another potential con, well, it could be a pro or a con, depends how you perceive it. But these funds, again, are typically going to be passively managed. Again, there's some actively managed exchange traded funds out there. But in general, for today's conversation, we'll say that ETFs we're going to consider the passively managed ones.
Sure.
And so you could say, no, I want to have a fund where there's somebody actively buying and selling the different investments, and I think that's going to help me get better returns. Well, this is not that. If you go buy an S&P 500 ETF, you own the 500 biggest companies in the country, more or less, right? Mm-hmm. And if one of those companies starts doing really bad and you wish you had some mutual fund or some manager in there like selling that for you, it's not happening. You're just continuing to own all of those 500 companies, right? So that could be a potential negative if you want somebody to be actively managing the individual investments and the individual securities. You are not getting that in a passively managed exchange traded fund. So it really just kind of comes down to different people's values, and I think there's plenty of people out there who do not value exchange traded funds and think their money is better invested elsewhere.
Yeah, no, that is great, and that really kind of breaks down. And I know that in a little teaser for our audience, we're going to kind of do a comparison in a future podcast about episode 13 mutual fund, this one with an EFT, and kind of break down the
ETF.
Oh my gosh, ETF, yeah. Off to a strong start there. So, but I'm super excited to kind of break down those, because a lot of my questions that I have now kind of be like, well, why would somebody want either one?
Right.
So this kind of
absolutely
wets the whistle for people to kind of now you kind of know at least a high level overview of what an ETF is, pros, cons, and kind of see how that could be applied to you. But I actually didn't know that even with last episode and with this episode, like the diversification factors is really cool to me. Like,
absolutely.
Like I think that's so neat to be able to be like, I can own a partial piece of like the top 500, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a great tool that, I mean, people didn't necessarily always have access to, or the cost around all these tools have declined pretty substantially over the last few decades. And so, it's a tool where maybe you would have had access to, but it would have been really expensive. And now it's, again, depends on your perception of cost, but, relatively, affordable.
Yeah, no, that's great, Ryan. I really appreciate it, and really appreciate the breakdown for sure. And we'll go ahead and pause right here. Be back on the other side with some personal stuff, and hang tight with us.
And now, to put the personal in personal finance.
All right, we are back on this side of the episode with a little personal section here. I love to give the listeners a little, peek behind the microphone of who's bringing you this financial knowledge, if you will. And so, Ryan, we're going to go back to our childhoods here. Childhoods, yeah, that's a plural. Did you growing up? I don't know if you always wanted to be a financial advisor. I'm guessing not.
No.
Most people don't end up doing what they want to as a kid. But what did you have a career or a pipe dream that you wanted to be growing up?
Yeah, I always, we had a dog growing up. My parents got a dog about the same time I was a baby, and so me and this dog like kind of grew up together. So I always loved like dogs and animals, and I think my first probably career aspiration was to be that of a vet. You have no idea what a vet does, but it's just I like animals. So that's a job that you're working with animals, right? Yeah. So I think vet was probably my initial, like, as a elementary school type aspiration. As I got into like middle school and probably even into high school, early high school, I wanted to be a golf course architect.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool.
I don't know about the golf courses you've played, but most of the ones I play, they're designed so poorly. Like they put the trees and the water traps right in front of my ball. Yeah. The sand traps, like no matter where I hit it, it's hitting a tree, hitting a water trap, hitting a sand trap. And so, if I could just design my own golf course and I get all of that stuff out of the way of my slice, but in all honesty, I did want to be a golf course architect. I thought that'd be fun. Like I've always liked numbers and science and stuff. And I was into golf, and I thought that would be a really fun job. And then as I transitioned, I guess, from high school to college, I wanted to be an engineer. I think mostly just because I liked the math and sciences. Right. I heard that was a hard degree. And so I did go into engineering. I got my degree in mechanical engineering, and I practiced engineering for, I don't know, maybe 5-ish years. So yeah, I guess that was an aspiration as well.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. And for me personally, like turning the question on myself is I think back when there's a kid, you're a kid, you always have those kind of weird things that you want to do.
Yep.
My thing was for a number of years, like I wanted to be, this is probably when I was like 10, I wanted to be a watch fixer. I wanted to be somebody who, like, you would bring your like old time watch to, and he would fix it up.
You're not Swiss, are you?
No, I don't think so. But I always thought that would be such a cool. And I read a book one time, and this guy was fixing watches in it, and for some reason it just spoke to me as a kid. And then like I got a watch from like a thrift store, and I like broke it down. couldn't put it back together. Had no idea.
Like, yeah, maybe I'll do something else.
Yeah, kind of. That was kind of what dawned on me when I was like, maybe I'm not cut out for this. And then as I got older, I was like, I want to, I wanted to be a travel agent because I thought that I could
that'd be fun.
Travel the world.
Absolutely.
And then get free flights and different things. And so then I found out that it's not as glamorous as it's kind of made out to be. And then as I, when I moved down to Reno, I was like, I want to be in international education or promoting these different things. And then I found a job at Custom Ink where I'm at now, and I'm doing online apparel. And so you never really know, you think about I've been there for almost 10 years now in that industry, and I never would have thought growing up that I would be in custom apparel. Never even it's crossed my mind.
Yeah, it's funny how people end up where they're at.
Yeah, it really is to kind of see those the journey that people take and the people that impact that journey overall. And how you're just like, oh wow, that's really cool. I want to try that. And having the resources that we do and the ability to work hard and get there, you can pretty much do whatever you want. So
absolutely.
It's pretty neat to see. But awesome, man. Well, we're going to go ahead and end this episode here. But once again, appreciate all the listeners checking us out on all the different platforms. Appreciate the feedback when it comes in, and definitely continue to subscribe, rate, comment, whatever you might on your different platforms. And Ryan, I'll leave you to end us here.
Yeah, stay the course.
Thank you for joining us for the Fiscal Physical Podcast. Until next time, happy listening. And as always, stay the course. If you have a question or topic suggestions, please email us at podcast@alchemywealth.com. If you enjoyed today's discussion, subscribe to the podcast to ensure you never miss an episode. And consider leaving us a rating and review on your favorite platform. This helps other listeners like you find the show. For more resources, you can visit Alchemy Wealth Management's website at www.alchemywealth.com or find your Fiscal Physical, the book, on Amazon. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention that personal finance is just that, personal. Please don't take anything we say as advice. The preceding content is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It's not an offer or a solicitation, nor should it be construed or relied upon for tax, legal, or investment advice. It doesn't consider your personal financial situation or objectives and may not be suitable for you.